Hi everyone, I'm really excited to introduce my Classica crew neck pullover sweater. It is a great top-down raglan sweater. It's constructed a little bit differently than I typically construct my raglans. You start by working flat back and forth to make the neckline increases. There are no short rows in this, and it is a little different at the start. You do not make increases for the sleeves right away. You wait a little bit, and then you work flat, join the front by casting on stitches at the neckline cast on edge here, and then you'll work the raglan in the round, divide for the body, and work the body straight and end with 1x1 ribbing. Then you'll knit the sleeves in the round, and the sleeves have gradual decreases, and then you'll finish with a 1x1 rib for the cuff. You'll pick up stitches and knit this double folded over collar, which I absolutely love. So overall, it is a pretty straightforward classic pattern. It is knit with Drops Air yarn, which is a fabulous yarn. It comes in so many different great colors. I'm also knitting this in a hot pink version right now for spring. You can knit this in any color. It's great all year round. The yarn is really light and airy. It is not heavy at all. I did want to make note of the gauge. The gauge listed on the yarn is much different than the gauge that I got when I worked this. And for me, sometimes the standard gauge that's listed on the labels just doesn't work for me. So please, please, please take the time to gauge swatch. I had testers test this, and some of them had to go down a needle size, some of them didn't. The gauge listed on this yarn is 17 stitches and 28 rows for a 4x4 inch or 10x10 centimeter square piece of the work. So take the time to gauge swatch. I used 5mm needles for the main needle that I worked for the body, and I got 18 stitches and 28 rows for my row gauge. So the stitch gauge was only off by 1, but my row gauge was off by a lot. For some reason, the work just was much shorter for me. Again, gauge swatch, block the swatch just to see how it all works out for you after you've actually blocked the garment, because that might change things a little bit. My testers were pretty much able to hit my row gauge. I think overall the work tends to work up a bit shorter, so that's why the row gauge is a lot different than what's listed on the label. If you are off a little bit on the row gauge, I wouldn't really sweat it. All that really means is that your depth, your armhole depth, the raglan depth, the yoke depth, whatever, this part of the sweater will be a tad bit longer than what's listed in the measurements of the pattern. Now, if that's a big problem for you and you don't want it to be a tad longer, then you really do need to figure out how to adjust to get the correct row gauge. But if you're off a little bit on the row gauge, it's not that big of a deal. I tell you to work to a certain length for the body and a certain length for the sleeves. So if your gauge is off, your row gauge is off a little bit, you can just adjust by that by knitting to a certain length established in the pattern. So that's all I have to say about that. I'm really looking forward to walking you through this step-by-step video tutorial. Please click the link in the video description to either download a PDF copy of this pattern on Etsy or on Ravelry. If you are having problems finding the link, you can always go to my website at ashleylillis.com, and all of my patterns are on that website with links to the pattern on Etsy and Ravelry. So grab your yarn, grab all your needles, download the pattern, and let's get ready to make the Classica pullover. Okay, we are going to start by casting on stitches for our size using the long tail cast on method. I am simply just going to tie a slip knot by pulling the yarn through like this, placing it on my needle, tightening it up, making sure I've got my tail in front. And I'm gonna wrap that tail around my thumb, the other yarn around my index finger, and then I'm going to go underneath the yarn around my thumb, over the yarn around my index finger, and pull through. So that's 2 stitches I've got cast on here. And so you're gonna just keep going in this manner until you have the number of stitches cast on for your size. So if you are knitting a size medium, you will look at the corresponding size you will look at the corresponding number that is associated with that size. I've got the number of stitches cast on for my size now. Now I'm going to turn the work over. This is the wrong side of the work. We're going to purl back on the wrong side while also placing stitch markers to help us denote when we need to make our raglan increases. And we are knitting this sweater flat back and forth until we make enough increases to connect the front neckline. So let's start purling back, placing our stitch markers. So we're going to work across your first set of stitches here. And then you'll place your stitch marker. Then you'll work across the sleeve stitches. So just reference the pattern and figure out how many stitches you need to purl across before you place your next stitch marker. Before you place that next stitch marker to denote the end of the sleeve, this is the beginning of the sleeve. Now I'm going to place my next stitch marker, purl across the back, certain number of stitches before I need to place my next stitch marker to denote the end of the back stitches. I'm going to place my next stitch marker to denote the end of the back stitches. So now I'm going to purl across the next set of stitches, which is the other sleeve. Place my stitch marker after I've worked a certain number of stitches that the pattern tells me to. I'm trying to figure out which background works the best, and I think actually not using the gray background is better because the camera actually tries to focus on the background instead of the yarn. Okay, so now I've got all of my stitches cast on. I've completed my first row. Now we're going to start making raglan increases, and for a set number of rows we're going to omit sleeve increases here, and we're only going to do front. These are the fronts on either end. We're only going to do increases on the fronts and in the back. So we're only going to be making, for this first row, we're only going to be making 4 increases. One here, one here, one here, and one outside here. We are going to omit making sleeve increases for a certain number of rows. So just reference your pattern. And for this first row, we are not going to be making increases at the neckline. We're going to wait one more row. So let's start here. So we are going to knit to 1 stitch before the stitch marker, which is just knitting 1 in this case, and then we're going to make 1 right, insert the needle from back to front, and then knit through the front. And this first row will be a little difficult. So and then you knit that stitch, you're gonna knit the next stitch, slip the stitch marker, and these are our sleeve stitches, so all we need to do is knit across the sleeve stitches. This is going to be the left sleeve, so we're going to knit across the left sleeve stitches until we hit the next stitch marker. Once you hit the next stitch marker, you slip the stitch marker. We're going to knit 1 and then make 1 left, insert the needle from front to back, and then just knit through the back there. Then we're going to knit all the way to 1 stitch before the next stitch marker across the back. When you have 1 stitch left before the next stitch marker, you're going to make 1 right, insert your needle from back to front, and knit through the front. Knit 1. Slip the stitch marker, and now we're at the other sleeve, so you're just going to knit across those next sleeve stitches. Once you hit the final stitch marker, you will slip that, knit 1 and make 1 left. Insert the needle from front to back, knit through the back, and knit the final stitch. Now you just turn the work and purl all the way back, slipping all of the stitch markers along the way. And just purl all the stitches, slip those stitch markers as you come across them. So I've purled back. So now we are done with our first raglan increase row and our purl row. So we've increased 1 stitch on either front, and we've increased 2 stitches on the back. We have not increased stitches for the sleeves. We are going to work a few more rows, making increases for the backs and the fronts before we start making our sleeve increases. And now we're also going to start making increases for that V-neck. So we're going to do an additional increase after we knit the first stitch along that front neckline. So now for our third row, we're going to knit 1, make 1 left, insert the needle from front to back, knit through the back, knit to 1 stitch before the next stitch marker, which now is only 1 stitch. We're going to make 1 right, insert the needle from back to front, and knit through the front, knit 1, slip the stitch marker, and now we're going to just knit across those sleeve stitches. Once you get to that next stitch marker, after you finish knitting across those sleeve stitches, you're just going to slip that stitch marker, knit 1, make 1 left, insert the needle from front to back, knit through the back, knit across the back stitches until you are 1 stitch before the next stitch marker. When you're 1 stitch before the next stitch marker, you're going to make 1 right, insert the needle from back to front, and knit through the front, knit 1, slip the stitch marker. You're at the sleeve stitches, so you're just knitting across those sleeve stitches. When you get to that next stitch marker, you will slip that stitch marker. We're going to knit 1, make 1 left, insert the needle front to back, knit through the back, knit 1. Now we're going to make 1 right at the other neckline. Insert the needle back to front and knit through the front. And then you'll just knit that final stitch, turn the work, and purl back. Again, you'll just purl back again, not making any increases, just slipping the stitch markers as you go. So I've finished that row. Now the pattern will tell you to work the increase round we just did, where we increase at the neckline, at the front and the backs, and the other neckline, omitting the sleeve increases a certain number times more, for a total of a certain number of stitches. And then we'll start making increases at the sleeves. And then at some point we're going to stop making increases at the front so we can connect the front and neckline. So just look at the pattern, figure out how many more times you need to work the V-neck and the front increases and the back increases without making the sleeve increases. And then I'll see you back here. I've just finished purling back. I'm on the right side of the work now, and I've completed the number of rows I'm supposed to complete for my size, increasing on the neckline, in the fronts, and the backs without making the sleeve increases. So I've reached the point where now I need to start working the sleeve increases as well. So we're going to continue working similarly to how we've increased, but now we're also going to add the increases on the insides of both sleeves. So that's 4 additional increases. So we're increasing a total of 10 stitches now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 now, as we make these increases. So I'll just show you exactly how to work this. Again, it's very similar to what we've been doing. We're just going to increase now in the sleeves. So you knit 1, make 1 left, knit to 1 stitch before the next stitch marker, make one right, knit one, slip the marker, knit one, and now we're going to start making the sleeve increases. We're going to make one left, insert the needle front to back, knit through the back, knit to one stitch before the next stitch marker, make one right, insert the needle back to front, knit one, slip the stitch marker, knit one, make one left, insert the needle front to back, knit through the back, knit across the back now until you get to one stitch before the next stitch marker. Once you've knit one stitch before across the back to the next stitch marker, you're going to make one right, knit one, slip the stitch marker, knit one, make one left, insert the needle front to back, knit through the back, knit across those sleeve stitches to one stitch before the stitch marker, make one right, knit one, slip the stitch marker, knit one, make one left, knit to one stitch before the end, make one right, insert the needle back to front, knit through the front, knit one, and now you've finished your first sleeve increase and the rest of the increases. And I just wanted to take 1 second. Some people say they get confused when to make a make one right and when to make one left. And the easiest way to remember is how I remember it, like with the necklines, is you want to increase away from the neckline. So I need my stitch to go in this direction because my work is going in this direction. So that would be a make one left. When you get to the stitch markers, when you are to the right of the stitch marker, you're going to make one right. You want to go away from the stitch marker. When you are to the left of the stitch marker, you want to go away from the stitch marker, so you're going to make one left. So it's make one right to the right of the stitch marker, make one left to the left of the stitch marker. And for the necklines, you're working away from the neckline. So I want since the neckline is going out in this direction, I want my stitch to go this way. So that would be making one right. So you're going to purl back now, and then you're going to repeat these increase rows a certain number of times more. The pattern will tell you how many times more to make those increases, and then that'll be at the point where you have finished making the neckline increases, and then we're going to need to cast on stitches at the neckline and join in the round. So I will see you back here when it's time to join that front neckline. I've completed the repeats the number of times I'm supposed to for my size, making increases at the neckline, the front, the sleeves, and the back. I've ended after a wrong side row, so I've purled back. So I'm on the right side of the work. Now we're going to repeat one more increase row, including the increase at the neckline. So we're going to repeat that increase row one more time all the way around, and then when we get to the end, we are going to cast on a certain number of stitches and finally join the work in the round. So now the pattern will tell you to repeat a row one more time. So we're going to just work the same increase row we just did all the way across. And then once we get to the end of the row over here, I'll show you how we're going to join in the round and finish that neckline. I'm finishing up this last right side increase row. And now I'm going to reference my pattern and look at how many stitches I'm supposed to cast on now at the neckline. So we are joining this work in the round now. So we're going to add stitches to the front here, so the front stitches and the back stitches are the same. So you're going to backwards loop the number of stitches that you're supposed to for your size. Halfway through, you're going to want to place a stitch marker so that you can denote the new beginning of round. So halfway through, I'm going to place my new beginning of round stitch marker. And now I've cast on all the stitches I'm supposed to at the base here, and now I am going to join in the round by just continuing to knit. And now we're going to start our round one here, where we're just knitting all the way around, slipping the stitch marker. So we're not working back and forth on the right side and the wrong side row, because when we worked on the wrong side row, we were just purling without increases. So because we just previously made increases, we need to just knit all the way around, and then we will start increasing again once we alternate a knit round. So just now knit all the way around to the beginning of round marker. I'm knitting all the way around now to the beginning of round marker, and I just wanted to show you how to knit those cast on stitches. You're just going to work them very carefully, working them so that there's basically a loop that's acting like a knit stitch, and you just lift them off carefully. And they might seem like they're a little loose, but they will tighten up as they go. And remember, we're going to be picking up stitches to knit the collar, so everything will tighten up. So that's how you knit into those backwards loop cast on stitches. And when you get to the beginning of round marker, you're going to continue. And I'm just taking a pause here. Once you get to the end of the round, you're going to make an increase round. And so an increase round now is just increasing on either side of the stitch marker. So you're going to continue, make one right, make one left, 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 knit to the beginning of round marker, and then followed by a knit round. So we're gonna knit an increase round, followed by a knit round, increase round, followed by a knit round, and then the pattern will tell you to repeat rounds 1 and 2, the increase round and the knit round, a total number of times until you get to a certain number of stitches, total stitches, and then it'll break down stitches for each section, and then it will be time to divide for the body. So I will see you back here after I've completed a certain number of increase rounds followed by a knit round for a total number of stitches, and then I will show you how to divide for the body. And I just wanted to show you how to switch to a longer needle. As you can see, I started filming on a longer needle and switched to a smaller needle. Once I joined in the round, I realized, or once I was about to join in the round, I realized I had my needle was too long. But now I want to actually knit with that longer needle, because you can see that my stitches are kind of bunched up on this, and I still have quite a few increases to work. So I am just going to switch to a longer needle. And this method applies if you're using one needle and switching to another, not interchangeable needles. That is a little different. But to use a different needle, all I'm going to do, and I'm not going to start, I'm going to make sure I don't have my beginning of round marker right at the end. I've knit one stitch, so that prevents this stitch marker from kind of falling off. But all you do is knit off of one needle onto the other all the way around, and then you just drop. the other needles. So these needles are the same size needles, but they're just different lengths to allow more room for my stitches to expand across as I continue to add stitches. It just kind of gets bunched up when you're knitting on shorter needles. So all you're gonna do is simply knit off of the old set onto the new set. So my old set is on my in my left hand, and my new needles are in my right hand. And you can kind of pull this through so the stitches don't fall off. So you just knit all the way around, and you don't have to start at the beginning of a round. You can start wherever you want, really. You just continue working in the pattern. So that's what you do. I'm working my way around. I'm almost done. It can get a little wonky towards the end here as you're about to drop that original needle, but last stitch, and now I'm done with that needle, and I've got all of my stitches on my longer needle, and they just have a little bit more room to spread out now. And I'm going to continue knitting in the established pattern until it's time to divide for the body. I also wanted to show you how I'm going to join my next skein of yarn. I am at the point where I am almost done with my first skein, and I'm going to join in the most kind of nondescript area that I can. Like, I'm not going to try to join a new piece of yarn in the front. I'm going to do it in the back and kind of to the side. So I am going to stop knitting at a good point and give myself room to knit at least 3 or 4 stitches with a little bit of a tail. And now I'm going to take my new skein, double it up. So here's my old piece of yarn, here's my new piece of yarn. And the easiest thing for me to do is I'm gonna leave a little bit of a tail on both ends, and I'm gonna knit double for 3 or 4 stitches. So I've just knit 4 stitches. I'm gonna drop the old skein and just continue knitting with the new one. And this way I can just go back and trim the ends, and they're kind of basically already woven in because I've doubled them up. So that's how I join a new skein of yarn. It is time to divide for the body now. I have completed the number of increase rows followed by a knit round. Increase round followed by a knit round, the number of times I'm supposed to for your size. And I do want to note, some sizes might have you add armhole depth, which means once you've finished your increases, you will just knit around without making any increases for a certain length to make sure the sweater has enough armhole depth, basically that it is long enough from your neck to underneath your armhole. Once you are finished with that point, you're gonna divide for the body, and I'm coming up to my beginning of round marker here. And what we're gonna do is actually remove this beginning of round marker because we are shifting where this new beginning of round will be. We're gonna knit now to the first stitch marker. So we're gonna finish knitting across the front to this first stitch marker, which denotes the beginning of the sleeve. This is the end of the sleeve, and we're going to be placing both sleeve stitches on a placeholder so we can just knit the body. So we'll be connecting the fronts and the back by removing the sleeve stitches. That's what happens when you divide for the body. So I'm going to knit across the front now after removing my stitch marker to the first stitch marker that is between the left front and the left sleeve. So once I get to that stitch marker, I will show you how to remove those sleeve stitches. Once I get to my first stitch marker, I'm going to remove the stitch marker. I'm going to reference my pattern and figure out how many underarm cast on stitches the pattern tells me to cast on for my size. So I am going to cast on those stitches using the backwards loop method, but I'm also going to place the stitch marker, the beginning of round marker, halfway in the middle of those underarm cast on stitches, and that will be the new beginning of round marker. So once I've cast on those stitches, I'm going to remove the sleeve stitches. In my case, I'm going to use this knitting extension cord that I can just shift my stitches onto. You can use a piece of waste yarn and a tapestry needle to do that. I will link the extension cords in the video description, and they come in 3 different sizes. This is the smallest size, and it's really working well because I have these pointy needles, but you might want to go up a size if you don't have these pointy needles, because it can be harder to attach to your needle. So I'm just going to slide the extension cord through. This is actually a pretty long piece that I've cut, and you're going to make sure the work is in front. And once you have those stitches on, you're going to remove that other stitch marker, and now just knit across the back to the other stitch marker, denoting the end of the back and the beginning of the other sleeve. I've worked all the way around to the next stitch marker. I'm going to remove that stitch marker. I'm going to cast on the number of stitches I'm supposed to cast on at the other underarm. We don't need to put a stitch marker on this one because we have already denoted the beginning of round. You don't really need to put the stitch marker on. So now I'm going to put another knitting extension cord onto the end of the needle here and push my sleeve stitches on. So I'm going to move the stitches all the way up to the next stitch marker, because this is the front now, and I'm going to carefully place those on. Remove the extension cord, pull this through, remove the next marker, and I'm just going to space these out here, make sure my work is in front. So my sleeve is in the right, facing the right direction. I'm just checking my underarm cast on stitch amount, and now I am going to connect to the front and knit all the way around to that beginning of round marker. So now we've joined everything. So we have our sleeve stitches kind of resting off the needles, and we'll work the sleeve stitches later. But now we can just knit in the round, the front and the back together with the underarm cast on stitches. And I'll show you how to work those underarm cast on stitches because they can be a little wonky. And when you work around to those underarm cast on stitches, it's similar to how we worked when we cast on at the neckline, but you just have to be super careful when you pick up those stitches and knit them. You just need to make sure the stitch stays twisted and stays on the needle. And now we've completed our first round, so now all you're going to do is to knit each round until you reach a certain length from the underarm. So that's right where we are, a certain length from here on down. And then we'll work the body ribbing. So I'm going to continue knitting the round, and I'll see you back here once I've knit to the length I'm supposed to for my size, and I'm ready to begin the body ribbing, that body hem. Here's what the work looks like. I just want you to see. So we have our sleeves out, and this is upside down. Our sleeves are out, and we've got our collar here. And I might stop in a little bit and work the collar. I do like to work the collar because it'll help make sure the sweater sits on you correctly. So if you're trying the sweater on as you go and you want to figure out how long you want to make the sweater, if you don't want to follow the pattern to a T, you can try on the sweater, but it might be good to have the neckline finished just so you have a better idea of how the sweater is going to sit on you. I've worked a few inches of the body now, but I'm going to stop and work the collar now. So to work the collar, I'm going to pick up stitches in the round, and I'm going down, just reference the pattern for the needle size to go down to, and I am going to make sure I've got another skein here, and I'm gonna take my 16-inch circular needle, and I'm gonna start about halfway through in the back here. And I'm going to start picking up a stitch for every stitch across the back. I'm gonna loop the yarn around and pull through to pick up that first stitch. I'm gonna make sure I've got a long enough tail to weave in later. I'm gonna pick up a stitch for every stitch across the back, which means I'm going into both legs of that top stitch all the way across the back. And then you're gonna do the same thing across the left sleeve. And then once we get to the front here, I'll show you how we pick up about 4 stitches for every 5 rows here. Okay, so that's the only thing that's a little different because we will be working in the opposite direction of the work. So I will pick up stitches all the way across this half of the back and across the left sleeve. So I've picked up stitches across half of the back, across the sleeve, and now I'm working down the left front neckline, and we don't want to pick up a stitch for every stitch here because we're working in a different direction. So I'm gonna pick up 1, 2, 3, skip a row here, 3, skip a row, 4, that's 4 stitches for every 5 rows, 1, 2, 3, skip a row, 4. One, 2, 3. Skip a row. 4. It's caught there a little bit. Okay, and then I'm gonna go 1, and then now I'm at the bottom here, so I'm gonna start picking up the bottom of the neckline stitches, 1 stitch for every stitch across that neckline. I'm picking up the loop and the top there. Not easy to do. I'm just working across every stitch here, across that neckline, and then you're going to do the same thing up the right neckline, 4 stitches for every 5 rows, and then a stitch for every stitch across the right sleeve, the top of the right sleeve, and the rest of the back, and we'll join with a stitch marker here. I've picked up all the stitches all the way around the collar. For some of the larger sizes, you probably would be able to use a 24-inch circular needle. I just used my 16-inch just to be safe. And now, also, you are going to want to make sure you have an even number of stitches that you have picked up. To be honest with you, I usually don't check that I have an even number, and then if I'm off towards the end, I'll add an extra stitch or knit 2 together towards the end of the round. But you just start knitting 1 and purling 1 all the way around. So you're going to knit, once you hit the beginning of round marker, you are going to want to knit the knit stitches and purl the purl stitches until you reach the length you're supposed to for your size from where you cast on. So you join in the round, and then you start the knit 1, purl 1, making sure you have an even number of stitches cast on for the collar, so the knit 1, purl 1 works out. So you're just going to knit 1, purl 1 all the way around. And you come back around, slip the stitch marker, then just continue the knit 1, purl 1 knit 1, purl 1 till the length that this pattern specifies. So I've finished knitting the collar to the length I'm supposed to, and you just measure from the base of the collar up. We're going to fold the collar over, seam it, and bind off all at the same time here. So I'm going to take my left hand needle, and you can see the first stitch on my left hand needle, and I'm going to follow that down, and I am going to, once I follow that down, pick up this stitch that aligns with it. So now I have 2 stitches on my needle, my left hand needle over here, that I am going to knit 2 together. So the stitch I just picked up and the stitch that was previously on my needle. So I'm going to knit those 2 stitches together. I'm going to do the same thing now with the very next stitch. And you continue to work and knit 2 together. Once I've worked 2 stitches, I'm now going to start binding off. So I'm going to slip that first stitch over that second stitch I just worked. And then I'm going to continue working, following the work, picking up the needle, the cast on, picking up the edge from the stitch below, down at the base of the collar, knit 2 together with the stitch at the top. And once I have 2 stitches here, you just bind off. So it's pick up the stitch, knit 2 together, bind off. And you continue this all the way around until you have 1 stitch left over here. So just make sure you don't bind off too tight. You might want to bind off kind of loosely so the neck isn't too tight. I've worked all the way around. I have 2 stitches left here. I'm gonna bind off, and I have 1 stitch left, and you can just cut the tail and pull that through now, and then you can just weave that end in later. And now I have the collar done. Once your body reaches the length it's supposed to from the underarms, you measure from where you cast on the underarm stitches down to the bottom of the work. Once you get to the length you're supposed to, or the length you would like, and just make sure you take into account the length of the body ribbing in the overall length if you're adjusting the size, you're going to take a smaller needle and start your 1x1 rib at the bottom. So I'm going down a size for my ribbing. You don't have to. I just recommend it because it usually helps to make the work just look a little neater. So you're just going to start your 1x1 rib, so knit 1, purl 1 onto the smaller needle all the way around. Knit 1, purl 1, and you're going to continue the 1x1 rib until the length you're supposed to in the round, and then I will show you how to bind off. Now it's time to bind off for the ribbing once you've worked your 1x1 rib for a certain length, and I'm going to show you how to work a tubular bind off. You can bind off any way you would like, but tubular bind off is a little stretchier. You can do a standard bind off. So I'm actually going to remove my stitch marker, and I'm going to use a removable stitch marker to work through the first 2 stitches, and this will help me once I have finished working all the way around to kind of complete the last couple of stitches. So I'm going to attach my removable stitch marker through those first 2 stitches. I have cut a length of yarn, my tail, that's about 3 times the length of the entire sweater. So it's very long. It'll be more than enough yarn. You could, probably get away with 2.5. I usually just use 3 times the length of what I need to bind off just to be safe. So we're going to start working our tubular bind off, And our first stitch is a knit stitch because it's the beginning of the round. So we're just going to slip, we're going to work this in 2 steps. So here are the 2 steps. You're going to slip off the first stitch as if to knit, skip the next stitch, and then enter that second stitch on the needle purlwise. And that is our first step. And then you're gonna pull through. And this is where I think a lot of people get, you know, a little confused, or it's a little tricky because this tail can get caught a lot as you are working through. So remember to just go slow, keep the stitch kind of off to the side a little bit so it doesn't get caught on the other needle, on the stitch marker. Okay, here's our second step. The next stitch is a purl stitch. So we're going to slip off this first stitch purlwise from the needle. Then we're gonna go in from behind in between the next 2 stitches. So we're skipping the stitch, going in from behind and turning the needle and entering as if to knit. So we're coming out the back like that. And this, again, be careful as you pull all of this through, making sure it doesn't get caught. And again, at the beginning, you're gonna have a really long piece of yarn, and I'm gonna make sure it doesn't get caught on my removable stitch marker. I'm kind of pushing it off to the side here. That usually works the best, in my opinion. And you're gonna pull the stitch pretty tight. All right, so I'll show you again. So that was our second step. So now we are going to slip off the stitch knitwise, skip the next stitch, enter the second stitch from the needle purlwise, and pull through. Then you're going to slip off the purl stitch purlwise, come through behind in between those next 2 stitches, wrap around and go in knitwise to that next stitch and purl through and pull through. So now you're going to continue this all the way around. You're going to want to make sure you pull the work pretty tight. And then I will show you what to do once you've worked all the way around. All right, when you work all the way around on the tubular bind off and you just have a few stitches left, I'm going to show you how to end this. I'm on a knit stitch here, so I'm going to slip that stitch off knitwise, skip the next stitch, and that first stitch is the one I need to go through purlwise. So I'm going to go through like that. And you're basically just going to be continuing, dropped that. You're just going to be continuing doing what you've been doing, but we just need to work off of the stitches that are on that needle. So my last stitch here is a purl stitch. So I'm going to slip that stitch off purlwise, and I'm going to come in between these 2 stitches as I would come back between those. And I'm actually going to make this an extra step here instead of trying to go through. So, and then I'm going to go back through that final stitch knitwise. And then I can remove my needle and I can just weave in my ends here and weave in my ends up a leg, pull this through, and then you can just cut a tail. To knit the sleeves, we're going to remove the knot if you have a knitting extension cord that you've used and you've tied a knot. So you're going to place these stitches back onto the 16-inch needle, and this will be the same needle size that you knit the main body in. However, the length will be shorter. I'm using 16-inch circular needles here. And I am just going to slide these stitches back on. If you have used a piece of waste yarn, you can slip the stitches back on the needle And I'm just gonna slide these all over. I'm going to remove that extension cord, and now we're going to join the yarn at this side of the underarm here. So this is the underarm, these are our cast on stitches, and we're going to place a stitch marker halfway between those stitches we've picked up. So I'm going to leave a little tail here to be able to weave that in later, and I'm going to take my needle underneath that loop that signifies that first cast on stitch. I'm going to wrap the yarn around, pull this through. I cast on 6 stitches at my underarm, so after I've picked up and knit 3 stitches, I'm going to place a marker to denote the beginning and end of the round, and then I'm going to continue on picking up the remainder of the stitches. And now I'm going to just start knitting in the round. So you're going to work to a certain length, and then I'm going to show you how to work a decrease. So we're going to be working a decrease every certain amount of, the pattern will tell you how often to work a decrease round. You know, it can be an inch, inch and a half, less than an inch, just depends what size you're knitting and how many stitches you need to decrease. If you want to decrease more stitches than the pattern calls for, you can create increases more frequently. I'm working around finishing my first round here, and you will have a little bit of a gap as you come around, and we're gonna just use our tail at the end to tighten up the underarm gaps that we might have. So don't worry about that. You're gonna have them usually at either end of the underarm, and we'll just tighten those up at the end with our tails. So I'm going to continue on until it's time to decrease. When you reach a certain length measured from the underarm, you are going to decrease stitches, and we're going to do 1 decrease on this side of the stitch marker and 1 decrease on this side of the stitch marker. And then you're going to just continue knitting to a certain point from your previous decrease. The pattern will say like decrease every inch, inch and a half, 2 inches, might just depend on your size. It can be different. So you're going to slip the stitch marker. When it's time to do a decrease round, you're going to slip the stitch marker, knit 1, and then knit 2 together. Then you're going to knit all the way around until you have 3 stitches left. And then when you have 3 stitches left, you're going to slip, slip, knit 2 together, and so that'll decrease kind of going in the other direction. So you'll have decreases that go like this, and then you're going to continue making your decreases until you reach a certain point. Once you have knit your sleeves to the length you're supposed to for your size, or the length you would like to make it, and make sure you take into account the length of the ribbing that we'll add, and the pattern tells you how long the ribbing is. It's going to be time to knit the cuff of the sweater, and I'm not going to show you how to do this again because it is basically the same way we knit the body ribbing, the body hem, by switching to the smaller needle size, the size that the pattern tells you to switch to. You can use 16-inch circular needles. You can use shorties. I like to use shorties. Shorties are can be even shorter than 16-inch circular needles, or you can use double pointed needles. And you're going to switch to the smaller needle size to tighten up the cuff a little bit in the 1x1 rib, and you're going to switch to the smaller needles while working the 1x1 rib all the way around, and you're going to do the Italian bind off, just like I showed you previously for the cuff, or you can do a standard bind off. So that's how you knit the sleeve cuff. So here's what the cuff will look like when you're done. So you're just going to repeat the sleeve instructions for the other sleeve. And then I just wanted to take a second to show you how to finish up the sweater by seaming up some of those armhole gaps. And all I typically do is thread my needle, and I thread my needle with one of the tails I left over. And it's really not an exact science. I literally just kind of go around the edges. And just seam everything up so it's all a little tighter, and just kind of weave in my ends around that hole. And you can see that that one is closed up, so you can just repeat that for the other ones, and then you can just weave in all your other ends and just simply cut the tails that you have where you joined yarn, because you've already kind of woven those in because you did the double, you knit double for a few stitches. So just weave in your ends, and then you can block your sweater and enjoy it. Thanks guys, I really hope you enjoyed making your Classica pullover with me. I hope you love this sweater as much as I do, and you wear this sweater as much as I do. I'm about to make this in multiple different colors because I love it so much. And I will see you guys in the next tutorial. Take care.